Sarah Martinez adjusted her gym bag on her shoulder as she walked through the entrance of the Riverside Community Fitness Center. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the polished concrete floors. At 62 years old, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from decades of discipline, though her slight frame and silver-streaked hair might fool casual observers into thinking she was just another retiree looking to stay active. The transition had been harder than anyone could imagine. After 32 years of serving her country as a Navy SEAL, Sarah had thought the most challenging part of her journey would be the dangerous missions in foreign lands, the grueling training that pushed human limits, or the split-second decisions that meant life or death for her team. She never anticipated that the hardest battle would be something as simple as changing clothes in a women's locker room. 3 months had passed since Sarah began her medical transition, a decision that had been decades in the making. The hormone therapy was slowly changing her body, but the real transformation had happened years ago in her mind and heart. She had always known who she was inside, even when military regulations and societal expectations forced her to hide behind a facade that never quite fit. The fitness center had become her sanctuary, a place where she could work out in peace and begin to live authentically for the first time in her life. She had chosen this particular gym because it was known for being inclusive and welcoming to people from all walks of life. The staff had been professional and accommodating when she explained her situation, and for the first few weeks, everything had gone smoothly. As Sarah approached the women's locker room, she noticed a group of women clustered near the entrance, their voices carrying a tone that made her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. There were 5 of them, ranging in age from their late 20s to early 40s, all dressed in expensive workout gear that screamed suburban privilege. They had been coming to the gym at the same time as Sarah for the past week, and she had sensed their growing discomfort with her presence. "I don't care what anyone says," one of them was saying, her voice loud enough to ensure Sarah could hear. "This is supposed to be a safe space for women. I have daughters, and I don't want them exposed to this kind of confusion." Sarah paused at her locker, pretending to fumble with the combination while she listened to their conversation. She had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, survived underwater demolition training that broke grown men, and led covert operations that remained classified to this day. Yet standing in this mundane suburban locker room, she felt more vulnerable than she had in any war zone. "Look, there she is," whispered another woman in her 30s who wore her entitlement like designer perfume. "I'm going to say something. This has gone on long enough." The group approached Sarah's corner of the locker room with the determination of a military formation. Their leader, a woman named Jennifer who ran a successful real estate business and was used to getting her way, stepped forward with her arms crossed. "Excuse me," Jennifer said, her voice dripping with false politeness. "We need to talk." Sarah turned slowly, her gray eyes meeting Jennifer's gaze with the same steady calm she had maintained during countless high-pressure situations. She had learned long ago that showing fear or backing down only encouraged bullies, whether they wore enemy uniforms or yoga pants. "I'm listening," Sarah replied quietly, her voice carrying just a hint of the authority that had once commanded respect from some of the toughest warriors in the world. "We've been talking, and we're not comfortable with this situation," Jennifer continued, gesturing vaguely at Sarah's presence. "This is a women's locker room, and frankly, we don't think you belong here." The other women nodded in agreement, forming a semicircle around Sarah as if they were corralling a dangerous animal. One of them, a brunette yoga instructor named, stepped forward to add her support. "It's nothing personal," said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "It's just that we have rights too. We have the right to feel safe and comfortable when we're changing clothes." Sarah felt the familiar weight of judgment settling on her shoulders like the heavy gear she used to carry on night missions. She had anticipated this moment, had rehearsed what she might say, but standing here surrounded by these women, she found herself thinking about all the battles she had fought for the very freedoms they were now using against her. "I understand your concerns," Sarah said carefully, her voice remaining steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "I'm not here to make anyone uncomfortable. I'm just trying to live my life." "But you're not really a woman, are you?" Jennifer pressed, her voice growing bolder as she sensed what she perceived as weakness. "I mean, biologically speaking, you're still a man, and men don't belong in women's spaces." The words hit Sarah like shrapnel, each syllable designed to wound and diminish. She had heard similar sentiments before, had faced the skepticism and hostility that came with being transgender in a world that often refused to understand. But coming from these women, in this place where she had hoped to find acceptance, it felt particularly cruel. "I'm legally female," Sarah responded, her military training keeping her voice level even as her heart pounded. "I have all the proper documentation, and the gym's policies allow me to use these facilities." "Policies can be changed," said another woman, a local PTA president named Karen who was known for her ability to mobilize neighborhood complaints. "We're going to speak to the management about this, and if they won't listen, we'll take it higher. We'll get a petition together, contact the media if we have to." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, seeing fear and disgust where she had hoped to find understanding. These women saw her as a threat, an intruder in their sacred space, not knowing that she had spent 3 decades of her life defending their right to feel safe and secure in their own country. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had crawled through enemy territory, had held dying teammates in her arms, had made decisions that saved countless civilian lives, including women and children in war-torn countries. She had earned medals and commendations that most people could only dream of, had served with distinction in operations that would never be publicly acknowledged. And now she was being cornered in a suburban locker room by women who had never faced anything more dangerous than traffic on the interstate. "Please," Sarah said, her voice carrying a weariness that came from decades of fighting battles on multiple fronts. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I just want to work out and go home just like everyone else." But Jennifer wasn't finished. She had the bit between her teeth now, energized by what she saw as a righteous cause and the support of her friends. "You say you just want to be left alone, but what about our rights?" Jennifer demanded. "What about our daughters' rights? How do we explain this to them? How do we make them understand that this is supposed to be normal?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, and Sarah found herself remembering other questions, other challenges to her right to exist in the world as her authentic self. She thought about the young sailors she had mentored over the years, the lives she had saved, the missions she had completed successfully because of her skill, determination, and unwavering commitment to her country and her team. None of that seemed to matter here, in this brightly lit room filled with the scent of chlorine and disinfectant. Here, she was just a target for their fear and misunderstanding, a convenient scapegoat for their discomfort with a world that was changing faster than they could adapt. As the women continued to press their case, Sarah felt a familiar calm settling over her, the same focused clarity that had served her well in combat situations. She had faced worse odds than this, had overcome challenges that would have broken lesser people. This was just another mission, another test of her resolve and character. What these women didn't know, couldn't possibly understand, was that they were confronting someone who had been tested in ways they could never imagine. Sarah Martinez wasn't just any transgender woman trying to find her place in the world. She was a warrior who had earned her stripes in the most elite military unit in the world, someone who had proven her worth in ways that transcended gender, biology, or social expectations. The tension in the locker room had reached a breaking point. Jennifer was pulling out her phone, presumably to call the gym management, when Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She had spent her entire adult life learning when to retreat and when to stand and fight, and something about the righteous indignation of these women had triggered every protective instinct she had developed over 3 decades of military service. "Before you make that call," Sarah said, her voice taking on a different quality now, one that carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations, "maybe you should know who you're talking to." There was something in her tone that made Jennifer pause, her finger hovering over her phone screen. The other women sensed the shift too, the way the atmosphere in the room had suddenly changed from confrontational to something else entirely. Sarah reached into her gym bag and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, she extracted a military ID card that she had carried for over 3 decades, along with several other items that told the story of a life spent in service to her country. "My name is Sarah Martinez," she said, holding up the ID so they could all see it. "But for 32 years, I served my country as Chief Petty Officer Samuel Martinez, United States Navy SEALs." The silence that followed was deafening. Jennifer's mouth fell open, her phone forgotten in her hand. Took an involuntary step backward, her eyes widening as she processed what she had just heard. The other women looked at each other in confusion and disbelief, their confident stance beginning to crumble. "I don't believe you," Jennifer stammered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Women can't be SEALs, that's impossible." Sarah's expression didn't change as she pulled out additional documents from her wallet. A Purple Heart certificate, a bronze star with Valor device, photographs from various deployments showing a younger version of herself in military gear, standing with teammates in exotic and dangerous locations around the world. "You're right that women weren't officially allowed in the SEALs during most of my career," Sarah said calmly. "But I wasn't living as a woman then. I was living as the person the military needed me to be, even though it wasn't who I really was inside." She spread the documents and photographs on the bench between them, creating a visual timeline of a military career that few people could imagine, let alone achieve. Operation Neptune Spear, Operation Red Wings, Operation Enduring Freedom. I was there for all of it, Sarah continued, her voice never rising above a conversational tone despite the earth-shattering nature of what she was revealing. "I spent 8 years in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. I've been in firefights that lasted for hours, carried wounded teammates through enemy territory, and made decisions that saved civilian lives." Karen, the PTA president, was staring at a photograph that showed Sarah in full combat gear, standing next to a Black Hawk helicopter in what was clearly a combat zone. Her face had gone pale, and she seemed unable to speak. "I've earned every commendation the Navy has to offer," Sarah said, pointing to another document. "I trained some of the finest warriors this country has ever produced. I've seen things and done things that are still classified at the highest levels of government." Was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to reconcile the person standing before them with the elite warrior depicted in the photographs. "But she started to say, then stopped herself. "I'm transgender," Sarah finished for her. "I always have been, even when I was forced to hide it. Do you think that somehow makes my service less valuable? Do you think it erases 32 years of protecting the very freedoms that allow you to stand here and question my right to exist?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jennifer was staring at the Purple Heart citation, reading about how Sarah had been wounded while defending a convoy of civilians, including women and children, during an ambush in Kandahar province. "I don't understand," whispered another woman, Lisa, who hadn't spoken much during the initial confrontation. "How is this possible?" Sarah sat down on the bench, her movements deliberate and controlled, and began to tell them about a life that seemed impossible to anyone who hadn't lived it. "When I was 18 years old, I knew 2 things for certain," she began. "I knew that I was meant to serve my country, and I knew that I was living in the wrong body. But in 1982, there was no place in the military for someone like me. So I made a choice. I buried the person I really was deep inside, and I became the perfect soldier." She explained how she had excelled in every aspect of military training, how she had pushed herself harder than her peers because she felt she had something to prove. The physical demands of SEAL training had been brutal, but nothing compared to the emotional strain of living a lie every single day. "I became someone else," Sarah continued, her voice carrying decades of pain and struggle. "I learned to walk differently, talk differently, think differently. I became so good at being Samuel Martinez that sometimes I forgot Sarah existed at all." The women were listening now, their earlier hostility replaced by a mixture of fascination and growing shame. They were beginning to understand that they hadn't just confronted a transgender woman trying to use their locker room. They had cornered a war hero whose service record read like something out of an action movie. "The hardest part wasn't the combat," Sarah said, looking directly at Jennifer. "It wasn't the training or the deployments or watching friends die in my arms. The hardest part was coming home from missions where I had saved lives, where I had made a difference, and having to pretend to be someone I wasn't." She picked up a photograph showing her receiving a commendation from a Navy admiral, her face stoic and professional despite the magnitude of the honor being bestowed. Every medal, every promotion, every moment of recognition felt hollow because it wasn't going to the real me, Sarah explained. I was being celebrated for being the world's most successful. Karen found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why didn't you just leave the military and transition earlier?" Sarah's laugh was bitter and knowing. "And do what? In the 80s and 90s, being transgender wasn't something people understood or accepted. There were no protections, no policies, no support systems. I would have lost everything, including the only career I had ever known. But more than that, I felt a responsibility to my teammates and to the mission. Good SEALs are rare, and I was very good at what I did. She showed them another photograph, this one from a hostage rescue mission in Somalia, where she had been part of a team that saved 17 civilian contractors from terrorist captivity. I told myself that Samuel's service was worth Sarah's sacrifice, she said. That protecting innocent people and serving my country was more important than being true to myself, and for a long time I believed that. The women were struggling to process what they were hearing. Everything they thought they knew about transgender people, about military service, about strength and sacrifice, was being challenged by this quiet woman sitting in their suburban gym locker room. "What changed?" asked, her voice much softer now than it had been during the initial confrontation. Sarah's expression grew distant, as if she were looking back across decades of memories. "My team was ambushed during a reconnaissance mission in Afghanistan in 2012, she said quietly. A roadside bomb killed 2 of my men and wounded 3 others. I spent 18 hours carrying one of the wounded through enemy territory to get him to a medical evacuation point." She paused, the weight of the memory evident in her silence. "While I was sitting in that field hospital, watching surgeons fight to save my teammate's life, I realized something. I had spent 30 years becoming the perfect soldier, the perfect leader, the perfect man. But I had never spent a single day being the person I was meant to be. And if I died on the next mission, Sarah Martinez would die without ever having lived." The transformation in the room was palpable. What had started as a confrontation between strangers had become something much more profound and personal. These women were getting a glimpse into a life of service and sacrifice that few people could comprehend, and they were beginning to understand that their assumptions about the person standing before them had been completely wrong. The silence in the locker room stretched on as the magnitude of Sarah's revelation settled over the group. Jennifer was the first to break. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated as she stared at the collection of military honors spread across the bench. I had no idea," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm so sorry, we're all so sorry." But Sarah held up a hand, her expression gentle but firm. "You don't need to apologize for asking questions," she said. "You don't need to apologize for being concerned about your safety or your daughter's safety. Those are valid concerns, and you have every right to voice them." She began carefully collecting her military documents, handling each one with the reverence it deserved. "What I hope you'll understand now is that I'm not here to threaten anyone or make anyone uncomfortable. I'm here because after 32 years of protecting other people's right to feel safe and secure, I'm finally trying to claim that same right for myself." Karen was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks as she thought about her own children and what true service and sacrifice actually meant. "My son wants to join the military when he graduates," she said through her tears. "I've been so worried about him, so afraid of what might happen to him. But you've been through all of that and more, and you're still here. You're still fighting just for the right to be yourself." Sarah's expression softened as she looked at the mother's anguished face. "Your son will be in good hands," she assured her. "The military taught me discipline, honor, and the importance of protecting those who can't protect themselves. Those aren't bad values for a young person to learn." Stepped forward, her yoga instructor composure completely shattered by what she had learned. "Can I ask you something?" she said hesitantly. "During all those years, all those missions, did anyone know, did anyone suspect?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "A few people suspected something was different about me," she admitted. "I never dated women the way my teammates expected me to. I was always more comfortable talking to the local women during humanitarian missions, more understanding of their perspectives. Some of the guys thought I was just shy or focused on the mission. Others probably wondered but were too professional to ask." She pulled out one final photograph, this one showing her with a group of Afghan women and children outside a school that her unit had helped protect during a Taliban offensive. "This picture was taken during my last deployment," she said, showing it to the women. "We spent 3 months protecting this girl's school from terrorists who wanted to shut it down. Every day, I watched those little girls risk their lives just to get an education, just to have the chance to become who they were meant to be." The parallel wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Sarah had spent 3 decades protecting other people's freedom to live authentically while denying herself that same freedom. Looking at their courage, their determination to be more than what society expected them to be, I realized I was being a hypocrite, Sarah continued. I was fighting for their right to learn and grow and become independent women, while I was too afraid to become the woman I was meant to be. Jennifer had put her phone away entirely now, any thought of calling management forgotten in the face of this extraordinary story. "What happened when you decided to transition?" she asked. "Was the military supportive?" Sarah's smile was rueful. "Let's just say that military policies regarding transgender service members were evolving when I made my decision. I had to navigate a lot of bureaucratic challenges, medical evaluations, and administrative reviews. But my record spoke for itself, and I had the support of most of my commanding officers." She explained how she had worked with military psychologists and medical professionals to develop a transition plan that would allow her to complete her service with dignity while beginning to live as her authentic self. "The hardest part was telling my team," she admitted. "These were men who had trusted me with their lives, who had followed me into combat without question. I was terrified that they would feel betrayed or deceived." "How did they react?" Lisa asked, genuinely curious now. Sarah's expression brightened for the first time during the entire conversation. "Better than I had any right to expect," she said. "My second-in-command, a tough old chief from Texas, pulled me aside after I explained the situation. He said, 'Chief, I don't pretend to understand all this, but I know you've had my back for 8 years. If this is what you need to do to be happy, then I've got your back too.'" The women were smiling now through their tears, moved by the loyalty and brotherhood that had sustained Sarah through her transition. "Most of the team felt the same way," Sarah continued. "They said that my tactical skills, my leadership abilities, and my commitment to the mission hadn't changed just because I was finally being honest about who I was. If anything, they said I seemed more focused and at peace with myself." She carefully returned the last of her documents to her wallet, the physical evidence of her extraordinary life disappearing back into the ordinary leather folder. "I retired with full honors 18 months ago," she said. "And for the first time in my adult life, I'm free to be exactly who I am. That's all I want, really. The same thing everyone wants, the freedom to live authentically without hurting anyone else." The transformation in the room was complete now. What had started as a confrontation between strangers had become a profound moment of human connection and understanding. These suburban women had come face to face with a kind of courage and sacrifice they had never imagined, and their perspectives had been forever changed. Jennifer was the first to extend her hand. "I'm Jennifer Williams," she said, her voice humble now. "And I owe you an apology, not just for today, but for 32 years of service that I never properly thanked you for." Sarah shook her hand firmly, her grip carrying the strength of decades of military training. "No apology necessary," she replied. "But maybe next time, before you decide someone doesn't belong somewhere, you might ask them to tell their story first." One by one, the other women introduced themselves properly, shaking Sarah's hand and expressing their gratitude for her service. The fear and hostility that had filled the room just minutes earlier had been replaced by respect and admiration. As Sarah finished changing and prepared to head to the gym floor for her workout, Karen approached her one final time. Would you be willing to talk to my son sometime?" she asked hesitantly. "About military service, about courage, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult." Sarah's smile was warm and genuine. "I'd be honored," she said. "Tell him that real strength isn't about being the biggest or the loudest person in the room. It's about being true to yourself and protecting those who need protection." As Sarah left the locker room and headed toward the weight machines, the women she left behind were forever changed by their encounter with her. They had learned that courage comes in many forms, that service and sacrifice transcend gender and identity, and that the person you dismiss or judge might just be the very person who has spent their life protecting your right to do so. Jennifer pulled out her phone again, but this time it wasn't to complain to management. Instead, she began typing a message to her neighborhood social media group, sharing what she had learned about judgment, assumptions, and the true meaning of heroism. "Today I met a real American hero," she wrote, "and I almost missed the chance because I was too busy being afraid of what I didn't understand." In the gym, Sarah began her workout routine with the same methodical precision she had brought to every aspect of her military career. Around her, other gym members went about their exercises, unaware that they were in the presence of someone who had dedicated their entire adult life to protecting the freedoms they took for granted. For Sarah, it was just another small victory in her ongoing mission to live authentically in a world that was still learning to understand and accept people like her. She had faced down enemy combatants and survived the most dangerous military training in the world, but she knew that the battle for acceptance and understanding would be a lifelong campaign. As she moved through her exercise routine, Sarah reflected on the encounter in the locker room and smiled slightly to herself. She had spent 32 years learning that the most important battles aren't always fought with weapons or in foreign countries. Sometimes they're fought